Hello, I'm Martin Kelly of Friends Journal, and this is a Friends Journal author chat. And I'm very happy today to have with me Matt Rosen. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much for having me.
Matt is the author of a May article in Friends Journal called "The Light Will Be Shining at the End of It All When Membership and Convincement Diverge." And Matt, let me just give the audience here your bio. Matt Rosen is a convinced friend. He is a member of Oxford Meeting in the United Kingdom and worships with Oxford Young Adult Friends. He is a PhD candidate in philosophy at the University of Oxford, and he was the 2023 Cadbury Scholar at Pendle Hill. So tell me, we can actually start. How are Oxford Young Adult Friends doing these days?
Doing really well. I moved here in 2020 and there were only a small number of us, but there's been this kind of tremendous growth after the pandemic. And I think we don't really know how to explain that growth. It's very clearly not down to us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's felt wonderful. So it's a growing, strengthening community, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people just looking for Quakers, and just so many ways to find us now. We had a new person come in, and it's first time in a Quaker meeting, and I'm like, well, how'd you find out about Quakers? And he's like, well, I've been listening to podcasts and watching videos, and he showed me his, on Spotify all the podcasts he listens to. And I was like, wow, that's impressive. So it's just we're kind of accessible now in an odd way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's people looking for community coming out of the lockdowns over here.
Mm.
But I also think we tried really hard in kind of 2020, 2021 to think about sort of what's our message? What are we about as a community? And we really tried to cut out anything which was not the Quaker basics, which was not kind of worship together centered on the presence in the midst. And I think that kind of centeredness and simplicity has also drawn folks.
Well, your article is about convincement and membership and kind of making a distinction between the two. So the sort of quick version, what's convincement and what's membership? When do they align? When do they don't align? And should we even care if they align?
Yeah, okay. So the quick version is that convincement's a kind of transforming experience that early friends had, where they came to see how God was at work in their hearts. It's an experience which usually started for them with a feeling of being convicted, of being shown
Mhm.
that the way they were living was not the way they were called to live. And they had this experience of kind of Christ's immediate presence in their hearts, teaching and guiding them. And it was an initial experience. It wasn't the end of the road.
Yeah.
But it was this initial call into relationship with this teacher who was working in them. And membership really didn't exist for the first, I don't know, 90, 100 years of the Quaker movement. It came along later and came along for practical reasons, because we needed to know who was being born, who we needed to take care of, which deaths to record, those kinds of things. I think these days we tend to talk about convinced friends as those who came into membership in adult life.
That's
Those who
often
were not,
definition.
yeah. And I think that's a loss of the concept of convincement that early friends had. So yeah, I've been really interested in how, in my own life, in the young friends community I'm part of, how a call into being convinced and a call into membership are two different things. They may align, but they may not.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that famous story. You've probably heard it, Samuel Bonus, who went on to write the book of what it is to be Quaker ministry. I mean, it's kind of the text, like this is what you read to understand what Quakers first meant by ministry. But he was like one of the first second generation friend. He was following his mom around to the protest meetings, into the jails, I think, actually, where Quakers were being imprisoned. And one day in meeting, he was just sort of there and snoozing along, and the visiting Quaker minister, I forget her name, came up and sort of looked him square in the eye. I don't know if she pointed, but like, you call yourself a proper Quaker, but you come into meeting And you leave meeting and you're the same person, you haven't been transformed, and it just like, blew his mind. This idea that yes, we have to be convinced, even if we've been in meeting all of our lives and have been following our mom around to the prisons. It's a
Yeah.
powerful idea.
Yeah, I think, he had this insight at that point that being born, brought up in a meeting is not necessarily an advantage.
Mm.
I mean, it can be a disadvantage, it can be we can kind of miss the treasures and resources in the tradition because we're so used to them.
Yeah. The structures of membership were very much built for those early friends, the sort of 90 years after the start friends, to function in what they needed. And many years ago, if someone said like, "What is it to be a Quaker?" the answer would be, "Well, you have to be a member of a meeting." And it's just left out so many people. If you're not close to a meeting, if you just don't fit into the meeting culturally, you're too ethnic, too black, too queer, something's not fitting. Well, if formal membership is the only identifier as Quaker, then a lot of people have been left out. So is that, do we need to rethink our ideas of membership and commencement and how they relate, or are we still sort of stuck with that kind of 18th century view?
Yeah, I think what I came to see in thinking about it is that there are cases where convincement and membership can come apart kind of in both directions. So there are cases where it's not easy, it's not right potentially for convinced friends to be in membership of a meeting.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a scenario where that would be, where you're convinced but not a member.
I mean, it may just be, I know a lot of younger friends who are still very much in a wayfaring stage of life. And the kinds of commitment that, at least right now, membership tends to involve, um, just don't make sense if you don't know where you're going to be next year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's part of it. And that would have been very familiar, I think, to the first friends many of whom traveled in the ministry and pretty constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And for them too, belonging to one settled local community would not have made sense. But there are other cases, cases where perhaps the meeting near you doesn't feel right. Perhaps it's not a community where you feel able to worship. Perhaps you're not near a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
All these reasons. And on the other hand,
Yep.
I know that there are people who belong to our meetings in every way, pretty much, and who wouldn't recognize their experience in terms of convincement, who wouldn't say they've had this transforming turn toward an inward teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And in principle, I don't see why we shouldn't recognize that belonging.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And often just very, very involved friends and a deep
Yeah.
part of the community. And, they name their experience differently, they experience it differently, but they are very much one of us. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You said how there might be a friend who's only around for a year or two. They're convinced, they're not a member. They might be moving on. Do you think we should make special efforts to welcome them into formal membership? Like, what should be a bar of membership? I know people who have been coming to my meeting for like 3 months, and I've heard them mention, like, "Oh, well, I'm a Quaker now," and they're not a member. But should I be sidling over to them and saying, I know you've only been coming here 3 months, but you seem to sort of get it. Should you be looking at a clearness committee or some other process to actually formally join? How active should we be, and what bar should there be really for people who may not be with us for a long time if they move? What should we be looking at?
I think it depends, on what membership's for. So, on one picture of membership, um, it's for the ease of a meeting, a particular community of friends, knowing who belongs to it, who they're responsible for pastorally,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things. And if that's kind of all it is, then being recorded as a regular attender or as a member don't look that different. I think in my life there has been a real spiritual value in membership, because membership comes with certain kinds of very practical commitments
Mm-hmm.
to my meeting and my meeting to me, which are really helpful and anchoring on days when my convincement experience is harder to access.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to lose that. I wouldn't want, I'm not in the kind of membership should vanish camp. But if that's what membership's for, then I think it really does matter that friends have a readiness to commit to this kind of covenant relationship with a local body of friends.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't make someone a Quaker. It just makes them in this relationship with this meeting.
I was someone I was hanging around meeting houses for probably 15 years before I became a member. And it's like, really, should I have done that? Looking back, it's like, maybe I should have just joined relatively quickly and had that kind of bonding experience and covenantal relationship earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of it's because we're just not that clear about what membership is for as meetings. So we don't know when to say to somebody, all right, now's the time to consider this. Yeah, I mean, I think there's this kind of, I think sometimes it's thought that, okay, first you become convinced and then you apply for membership. And in fact, when you're applying for membership, some of the questions might be, is this a convinced friend? How do they understand their experience? But I think membership is sometimes the road to convincement. I mean, I think there are people who come into membership, come into this particular relationship with a meeting, and through that start to come into contact with this guide and teacher that the Quaker tradition has centered on. Yeah. And I don't feel there's a problem with that.
Membership is sort of our construct that we've put together, our structure to organize ourselves, whether that would change in the 21st century. I mean, there's so many things happening, especially after lockdown, where people are becoming very involved and indeed members of meetings that are hundreds, thousands of miles away through Zoom. I mean, we have so many opportunities now. Does our idea of membership need to adapt with that? I think it does. It is adapting, and we're kind of discovering this. But what other sort of ways might we adapt to better serve bringing people up into that kind of convincement and building our community?
I think for friends who are attending meetings and seeking membership of meetings that are at a real distance from them, who are attending those meetings online, there's just a question for meetings about how we support and involve those friends in the way that we would if they were a member who came in person. Mm-hmm. Both pastorally, practically, what does it mean for them to be in membership of this community? And I think those questions are being asked and talked about. There's also a move, at least in a few yearly meetings, to pull membership up to the yearly meeting level, mm-hmm. Particularly for younger friends who may be moving around a lot. Again, I don't think that's a bad thing. It may be the direction in which the Spirit's leading us. But I still think there are these questions about what exactly, what does a covenant relationship with this body, if it's a yearly meeting, look like? And how is it going to provide me with the same support for trying to live faithfully that a local meeting might?
Mm-hmm. What are some of the supports you've experienced in your work? I mean, you're doing a lot. You're at Pendle Hill. You're doing, at least I've attended one Pendle Hill lecture, talking about what it is to be a friend today. What kind of supports have you found helpful?
Yeah, well, about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I started to feel this leading to travel in the ministry over here in the UK. And I'd read about friends who traveled in the ministry. I'd read the journals and so on. But I also knew that it was a practice that had basically died out over here quite a few decades ago. And my initial response to this feeling of a leading was that it was crazy. It was an absolutely terrible idea.
Does that these days? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I felt, I'm much too shy and introverted to go around talking to people. Um, the traveling ministry over here died out for a reason. um, you know, uh, and this leading did not dissipate despite my attempt to reason with it.
As a good leading, will
Yes,
not. Yes.
yes.
Good test for a leading.
So I brought it to my meeting, and I think basically said to them, "Look, tell me this is not not something I need to do,"
Mhm.
um, and relied on these old processes, things like clearness meetings, putting together an oversight committee for the traveling, and my meeting felt clear that I needed to listen,
Yeah.
to this. And so I've been doing that, been traveling for the past year or so, and it's been wonderful. But I've needed a tremendous amount of support from friends from my meeting in seeking clearness and discerning how to do this, in being accompanied in the ministry. I think it's taught me a great deal about what our meetings as communities can do for us, how they can push us toward faithfulness when we really, really, really don't want to listen.
That's great. So that's a benefit of the membership
Yeah, absolutely.
that you've had. Sure. Great. Well, I think that's my questions for now. We could have so many other conversations. I mean, talking about state of young adult friends in the UK and certainly in the US, some lots of fire happening now. We could be talking about support committees. So I hope we see you again soon. We can talk more about many of these issues. So thanks for joining me today, Matt,
Thank you very much for having me.
and hope again to see you soon.
Yes.